It goes without saying that mikveh is one of the legs upon which Judaism stands. If you were to ask me to distill the three most important observances, it would be, of course, Shabbat, Kashrut, and Mikveh. I'm guessing that you may already know that if a community has funds to build either a synagogue or a mikveh, the funds have to go towards building a mikveh. Jews manage splendidly to pray, eat, talk, and argue. We could do that anywhere. But we need a mikveh for our future, for marriage, for children. So when I say the mikveh is the portal to the Jewish future, I am not resorting to hyperbole. I'm not trying to be poetic. I'm simply stating the fact. If a community has a complete infrastructure of synagogues and kosher butcher and a federation and a JCC, and I'm not so familiar with your particular landscape, but the full complement of Jewish organizational offerings, but not a mikveh that's accessible, it is not deemed a community in the eyes of halakha, of Jewish law. In some minds, mikveh is kind of a quaint custom, peripheral. You know, No. It's axiomatic. It's an anchor. It's at the nexus of who we are. How many of you have been atop Mitzada? Raise of hands. How many atop Mitzada? How many of you have seen the ruins of the most ancient mikveh that we have? Good. What's even more fascinating than the fact that modern mikvaot are built exactly in the same way as the ancient mikveh was built is to recognize the historic context in which it was built. Who populated Mitzada? The rebels. Not the mainstream, not the adherents of the rabbis, rebels. What else do we know about that? Historians tell us that there was very scant water supply atop Mitzada. There was a drought. But even rebels, even in a time that can only be described as acutely tenuous, they didn't know how long their life was going to last, a day, 2 days, a week. And even facing a drought, or let's just say a very limited supply of water, even they knew life could not be sustained without a mikveh. We know that if we have to sell a Torah scroll to raise funds for a mikveh, we do that. It's clear that this is our most important institution. I'm kind of thinking of the Indaba as a great mikveh, because mikveh means gathering. But if you're the type, you can close your eyes. If not, you can just imagine it with your eyes wide open. There's more. We need to understand that the world entire emerged from a mikveh. And our lives in their entirety are really about getting back to the mikveh. And I know you're thinking that my jet lag has kicked in vociferously. So let me explain. It's in the very first verses in Genesis. The world is described as being in a state of tohu vavohu. It's chaotic. But there is water. And the Bible tells us, V'ruach Elokim mirachefet al pnei hamoyim. And the Spirit of God flutters or hovers above the waters. This, my friends, is the description of the primordial mikveh from which all else emerges, just as the fetus emerges from the amniotic fluids. We'll come back to this. Hold that image, because everything goes back to that image. Let's talk about mikveh today. Mikveh today, used in 3 instances as the anchor of Jewish marital life. It is used for the immersion of vessels made of certain materials before using them in the Jewish kitchen or on the Jewish table. And of course, it's the crescendo, the final act of conversion into the Jewish faith. And if you said to me, I'm going to give you one word to describe mikveh, I would have to use the word transformation. But if you were feeling especially indulgent and you said, Rivkah, today I give you 2 words, I would have to use the word elevation. So that the dishes that come out of the mikveh are somehow different, elevated. They can now be used. The woman who goes into the mikveh in her post-menses state, in a state that the Bible describes as nidah, is now divested of that status. And she comes out different. And she and her husband can now resume their intimate relations. Most dramatically, the convert goes in as a son or daughter of Noah and comes out as a daughter or son of Sarah and Abraham, Rebekah and Isaac, Rachel, Leah, and Jacob. It's a wondrous thing, really. It's a wondrous thing that is so terribly misunderstood. I come from a different reality. Here in South Africa, I understand that most, if not all brides, correct me if I'm wrong, immerse in the mikveh at least once before they get married. But not everybody is so fortunate. Mikveh is what I often refer to as the Cinderella of Jewish observances. It's completely lost to so many of our brothers and sisters. Nobody would ever guess that it's one of, if not the most important thing in our tradition. It's right up there with Yom Kippur. It's right up there with circumcision. It's right up there with not eating bread on Pesach. There is nothing peripheral or tangential about this. So how did this happen? A confluence of events, perhaps the perfect storm. A lot of it, I think, has to do with lack of education. You know, we like to wax nostalgic about the shtetl, but not everybody was perfectly or even remotely educated. People did what they did because that's what a Jew did by osmosis. Women went to the mikveh, but they didn't necessarily understand the importance of the profundity. And that in confluence with the fact that most people's mind, when speaking about water, go to hydration and hygienics. Now we have to understand that in many, many locations, for many, many centuries, generations, Jews were barred from using the natural streams of water, the bathhouses used by the general population. And so in response, they built their own bathhouses. And then it made sense that they would build a mikveh in the bathhouse. And in many minds, this further cemented, tragically enough, this inextricable connection between mikveh and hygiene. Became very confused, very conflated. For a perfect example of this, you can read Bella Chagall, the wife of the famed artist, Bella Chagall's beautiful and moving memoir, Burning Lights. But there is this terrible, glaring mistake. where she describes going to the mikveh every Friday with her mother. And this remained in people's minds. Now, tzniut, modesty, is a very important value in our tradition. And of course, Shabbat candles is something done in the dining room. Kashrut is something done in the kitchen. But in Ashkenazic Jewry, not so in the Sephardic tradition, mikveh was kept shrouded, veiled by silence. And generally, tzniut is a very wonderful thing. It's always a very wonderful thing. But in this instance, it further caused and exacerbated alienation on the part of many Jews from this ritual. There are many, many people who told me their mothers never told them they went to the mikveh. And coming from North America, where you don't have to go see someone before you get married that's going to teach you about mikveh, their mothers didn't tell them before their wedding either. I'm not even going to talk about what feminism did to mikveh. That took mikveh from being archaic and irrelevant to being phallocentric, the archetype of a misogynist mind. What kind of crazy tradition is this? You take a woman, perfectly natural function, and you punish her, you call her names, and you send her to a bathhouse to cleanse herself? Really? And matters were not helped by the fact that when the Jews came over to the Golden Medina, there were very few mikvaot. And the mikvaot that existed were in a terrible state of disrepair. And the young woman who wanted to do what her bubby wanted desperately couldn't get herself to immerse in a mikveh that might have once been filled with clear water, but now was gray or black or midnight. Not when she had the miracle of modern plumbing at home. And in her mind, mikveh was all about getting clean. And it made sense in the old country, once a month, good cleansing. Luckily, thank goodness, we are living in a time of renaissance for mikveh. Beautiful mikvot are springing up across the world and have sprung up over the last few decades. And more importantly, there is not just physical access to mikvot, there is educational access to mikvot, like what we're doing today. So let's try to understand a little bit about this ritual. One of the things that bothers people is this idea, like I said. Here's a woman. Menstruation is a perfectly natural process. And you're sending her to a mikveh. And this kind of is a throwback to all the ancient taboos about menstruating women. Every society had them. Menstruating women were blamed for everything from wilted plants to fatal plagues. And there's a good reason. Because menstruation, my friends, makes no sense. None whatsoever. In the perfectly precise, sophisticated mechanism that is our body, menstruation stands out as anomalous. Why is it necessary? Really? Okay, so the body gets the signal that the egg is not going to be fertilized that month. All right. Why can't the uterine lining just stay in place? And if it really has to be dismantled, why can't the body reabsorb it? You know, we and the chimpanzees are the only mammals that experience overt menstruation. The other female mammals experience covert menstruation. They absorb the blood. That would be so much more convenient. Makes so much more sense physiologically. But that's not God's design. We're not animals. We're human beings with the privilege of choosing God, with the privilege of relating on a whole different level. But we need to keep this in mind so we don't fault the ancients for their belief that menstruation must be due to demonic spirits, some kind of danger. What else would cause the precise body to act with such an aberration? And so the consensus emerged in ancient primitive societies. The best way to deal with a menstruating woman was by avoidance. So when people hear about the laws of Nidah, about the laws concerning the menstruant woman, they conflate them with these primitive ideas. Nothing could be further from the truth. And to understand this, we need to understand a little bit about our system. One of our big problems is, and it's not our fault, but we often view our own faith unwittingly through the lenses of alien faiths and influences. You know the old story of, it's a great story, and if you've heard it, I'm sorry, and if you haven't, you deserve to hear this. When Henry Kissinger became the Secretary of State, Prime Minister Golda Meir sent him a congratulatory telegram. He was a little bit nervous about what seemed to him a bit of effusiveness on her part. Perhaps she was expecting special favors to be curried on behalf of the then nascent state of Israel. And so he said to her, in his response, "Thank you, but I just want to remind you, I am first an American, second a diplomat, and third a Jew." To which she responded, more or less, "Splendid. As you know, in Israel, we read from right to left." But we sometimes forget to read from right to left. We belong to a spectacular and spectacularly unique tradition. For instance, we don't suffer from a theology that sees human intimacy as a concession to the frailty of human flesh. No, our tradition teaches that there is nothing more holy for at least two reasons. One, this is the way two human beings can partner with God in bringing another aspect of the divine into this world. What could be more holy? More holy than fasting on Yom Kippur, more holy than mortgaging your entire business for tzedakah. The holiest of the holies when done in sanctified manner. And since you're my friends, you deserve to know that this is true when a couple who are sanctified in their union enjoy intimacy. It is the holy of holies, even when physical conception cannot take place. During pregnancy, postmenopausal, while using contraceptives, because our masters teach us, every time a couple who are sanctified are together, a soul is born. Not every soul is vested in a physical body. But we need to keep that in mind. That's one. But there's another mitzvah in addition to pru'ervu, be fruitful and multiply. And that is the mitzvah of onah. Season, her time, or in plain English, the biblical imperative for a man to give his wife conjugal pleasure. Now, this is splendid and wondrous and so progressive. But it's interesting that it's so holy. What gives it its holiness? Well, raise your hand if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of human needs? Good. Okay. So you know, and if you're not familiar with the hierarchy of human needs, then you surely know that you shouldn't speak to somebody who's hungry and tired and cranky about some type of, esoteric philosophy or some idea, right? It's going to fail. And especially if you need a favor from them, not then. Okay? Because we have a hierarchy of needs. And very low on the hierarchy of needs is safety and security. So let's go back to the beginning of time. No, I'm going to take you back to before time. Before time, before space, before delineation, before parameters, before constriction. There was just the endless light of God, the Or Ein Sof. But there arose in God a desire to enter into a relationship with Adam, with a human being, because God wanted us to create an abode in this lower world. But in order for this to work, there's one caveat. We have to have unfettered freedom of choice. We have to be able to spurn God as easily, at least, as we embrace God. Otherwise, we're reduced to puppets, or for that matter, angels, celestial animals and birds, just pets. They can't make choices. Only human beings can make choices. So the truth of the matter is that when God created us, when God created me and you and put us into this world, in order for his master plan to work, we have to have the proverbial enough string to hang ourselves. But God has a desire. God wants us to embrace that desire. And so it's very important that our most basic needs be met so that we can arch upward, look heavenward, and think about where we came from and where we're going. And so, in a very real way, when a husband and wife are together, it's a very personal affair with cosmic reverberation. The world entire, Hashem, awaits the blessings of this intimacy to waft from beneath the bedroom door, to fill the home with love and dedication and devotion and commitment. And then from the home to spill over into wider community. What is a community if not a tapestry woven of the individual threads that are the homes? And what is the home if not the structure built on the connection between the anchors, the basis of the home, the husband and wife? And so for these two reasons, the fact that we can bring a neshama down and the fact that we can fill this world with the healing energies that the world needs so that it can move upward in the ladder and look upward. Our marital beds, our bedrooms, are nothing less than the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. I saw how many of you were atop Mitzada, so I can extrapolate how many of you have been to the old city of Jerusalem. How many of you have seen or heard that the old city of Jerusalem is veritably riddled with ruins of old ancient mikvaot? How many? In temple times, every child knew where the closest 7 mikvaot were, for a very simple reason. To get into the temple, to get a top temple mount, you needed to visit a mikveh. Fact of life. What caused you to visit a mikveh? Because you had to be in a state of purity. You know the joke about the guy that gets shipwrecked? He's on an island, and he starts to build frantically. And he builds a Jewish community center, and he builds this, and he builds that, and he builds a shul. And then, one day they find him. And they say, come, we're going to take you home. And he says, not so fast. I want to give you a tour. Jewish Community Center, Jewish Federation, the butcher, the kosher bakery, my shul. Let's go. The guy's fascinated. A man alone on an island built this entire infrastructure. He says, but what's that building across your shul? He says, oh, that's the shul I wouldn't be caught dead in. The joke would not be so funny if it wasn't so true about us. We've done such a good job of fragmenting ourselves. But the time is coming soon when we will once again all belong to the same shul. And there's more good news. No dues. None whatsoever. But we will have to once again be in a state of ritual purity. And here we come to a little bit of a mine on the ground. The whole notion of purity and impurity, those terms are so pregnant with negative innuendo and nuance that it causes people to cringe. Sometimes I could see it physically. What are you talking about? Something dirty, vile, inferior? No. Tum'ah can be better understood when we understand what purity is. Because like darkness is to light the absence of light, so is tum'ah, impurity, the absence of purity. What is purity? One way of understanding it is to think about what is the most potent and recognizable symbol of the Creator in this world. And that, of course, is life, pulsating life. The cessation of life, or the eclipse of life, gives rise to an interruption, timtum, an obstruction. That is where impurity sets in. It's not negative or bad or dangerous or vile. It's simply part of the cycle of life that God has placed into our lives. And once we can understand that, we can relax. There were all types of impurities. There were all types of waiting periods after those impurities. And the process of coming back to a state of tahara, of purity, was always, the crescendo was always immersion in the mikveh. Today, in what many call this post-temple era, but in what I prefer to call this pre-temple era, sadly, very sadly, we lack the physical temple. But we have a temple, the Mikdash Ma'at, that is a synagogue. We have a more important Mikdash Ma'at in our homes. And we have the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, in our bedroom. And that necessitates tahara. And so, the laws of Nidah, of Taharat HaMishpacha, of Mikveh, remain into perpetuity, are listed separately in the Torah, and are not part of what are the interrupted laws at this time, the intricate web of laws that surround purity and impurity, that for this time have kind of receded to the backdrop of our national consciousness. No, this is front and center. What happens in the mikveh? It's a very good question. Mikveh is a chok. Mikveh is in that category of mitzvot that defies intelligence, that defies human understanding. But let's try, nevertheless, to use our God-given intelligence to possibly see what we might understand about this. You know, the Kabbalah has an interesting term for a tzaddik, a dug, a fish. Why? Because just like a fish cannot be taken out of water. Its connection to its source is so acute. So is a tzaddik, unable to be separated from its source. But take myself, I'm a land animal. Sadly, I confess to you that I walk the face of this earth with very little humility, not enough. I think I'm important. And it's possible for me to forget where I came from and where I'm going. I try very hard, but it's happened. It's possible, it's very possible. I feel myself. I'm very important. When we go into the mikveh, it's more than just the externals that are shed. Because of course, one has to experience total immersion. So nothing can come between the body and the waters in order for it to be a kosher immersion. But it's more than that. It's really about shedding our ego, shedding that sense of self, nullifying the self. You know, for decades now, people have been talking about finding themselves. And our tradition wants only one thing from us: lose yourself. Lose yourself in something larger than yourself. And in that moment, you come to a place of transformation. And you come to a place of unity with your Creator. You're suspended again, like in utero, and like in the grave at the other portal of life, where you no longer are infatuated with and blinded by the self that eclipses your source, the Creator. And here I must say something very important. It pains me to say this, but somehow mikveh has been treated as a boutique item in modern times, as a women's mitzvah. And there's been an attempt to woo people and to wow people and to massage the facts and to talk about a mikveh as a spa, which it should rival a spa, because the physical externalities of the mikveh should begin at last to reflect their enormous import in our tradition. But a mikveh is not a spa. A spa is for people who like to spend their money that way and their time. A mikveh is because God told us to immerse ourselves in God. And then there's all this talk about how it's going to enhance your marriage and your intimate life, which I have to tell you, it does in ways that are hard to describe. But I am not a fan of people getting up at a podium and saying, it will make your marriage scintillating. Your intimate life will be off the charts. Marriage is a very complex affair. And everybody knows people that don't use the mikveh who have a wonderful marriage, and people who do, who have a marriage that is lacking. Again, I could give you a 4-hour treatment based on all kinds of fascinating research about how the usage of mikveh strengthens the intimate life of a couple. But I don't like that as the reason for doing it. Nor do I like this mishigas about it being a spiritual experience. I have something to tell you. For every woman who comes out of the mikveh, having connected with her great-grandmother, having heard a celestial choir, having been rejuvenated, reborn, levitating, there's a lot of women who come out cold. And I want to tell you, and wet, and I want to tell you the following, because I feel very, very strongly about this. Selling mikveh as a spiritual event, by the way, like selling any other mitzvah like this, is a mistake. We're selling ourselves short, and we are selling our Creator short. Spirituality is just a word for what we experience outside of our physical senses, which is why listening to a concerto, looking at beautiful architecture, a good hit on drugs, these can all be spiritual events. Godliness is what we're searching for. And so, my friends, if you have been turned off because promises were made to you that this was going to be a very spiritual event and you didn't feel it, it's okay. You did the mitzvah. I have to tell you something. When I'm stuck in an airport for hours on end, which is an occupational hazard of traveling, really every time you travel, you're taken hostage. You just hope it's for a short time rather than a long time. And my scant options are all depleted because unlike everybody else around me, all I can eat is a banana, an apple, some trail mix, yogurt, just a few things. Everybody else has their pick of restaurants. What am I feeling? Spiritual. In the groove, levitating, connected, aligned, synchronized, calibrated. No! I am feeling hungry, cranky, I have a headache, and my husband, shall live and be well, is, as they say in French, the kapara. But is this a godly event? Yes. Is it a spiritual event? We're looking to connect. We have to be able to say this. Stop talking about a mikveh like going to a spa and what it's going to do for you in this way or the other. Here, can we say this? Mikveh is a mitzvah. There. I've said it, it's liberating. And a mitzvah is etymologically root of the word mitzvah, of course, which means the commander. It's not about me. It doesn't start with me. It starts above, a transcendent source. And it's rooted in the Aramaic tzavta, which means to connect. This is the way I connect with God. So I want to go back to the beginning. The world emerged from a mikveh. And we are looking to go back to the mikveh. Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. God is our mikveh. And God gives us subliminal, subtle messages. 70% of this planet is covered with the waters of the original mikveh. 70%. In beautiful symmetry, 70% of our body weight is mikveh. Don't you think this is God telling us? This way to the mikveh. So, very, very quickly, ha'ma'aseh hu ha'ikar. The main thing is action. A little bit of audience participation. What do we say when we come to a wedding? Mazel tov. What does mazel tov mean? Good luck. What's that? Like congratulations? No. It's the punchiest, most succinct prayer and proclamation of humility that we have. We come to a wedding and we say, God Almighty, despite our best efforts to create the most beautiful wedding and to hire the most exorbitant party planners and to find the newest shade for the bridal party's gowns, we acknowledge that the most important things flow from above. Mazal means the flow. How do you say a cold in Hebrew? Nozelet. And so, like I said, we're not so fortunate where I come from. Lots of brides and grooms never hear this. I say to them, you're on the cusp of the most important day of your life. The most important things come from above. And this is the door that God wants you to enter into life through. It's very important to recognize that the passage of a soul into this body into this world, into a body, into this world, is a precarious one. And it's helped in tremendous fashion if the woman goes to the mikveh before conception. It's also very important for us to remember that even if we've slacked, for whatever reason, we went, then we started feeling like it wasn't doing anything for me, it wasn't feeling spiritual, blah, blah, blah. And then sometimes we think, it's too late, I've slacked off, I can't come back. So last night, I was up whole night because, my whole body clock is messed up and I'm jet lagged. And in the state of delirium, God came to me and said that I should tell you, don't believe a word of this, that it's not too late, that you could come home. This whole idea that it's all or nothing is pernicious. Every mitzvah is precious. And consistent immersion in the mikveh on a monthly basis for the time that it's necessary is not something for only, overweight yentas with their wigs on slightly askew. It's for every Jew. And it's not for Jewish women, it's for Jewish families. When a woman immerses in the mikveh, she takes her soul and her husband's souls, and it affects the souls of her children and her grandchildren and the whole Am Yisrael. And finally, for women who are postmenopausal, know that it is necessary to go one last time. And then all of the intimacies for lange gesunde Jahren, for long, healthy years, are all blessed and holy. And for a woman who never knew about mikveh, I don't know if this could even happen in this part of the world, and only found out for some reason after menopause, and she's married to a Jew, she should go to the mikveh. Maybe you have relatives in a different part of the world to whom this applies. And before God created the world, God created teshuvah, the ability for us to retroactively affect our past. And one immersion in a mikveh, coupled with true teshuvah, can affect the souls of her children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. I have to tell you a story that requires a leap of faith, but you're not sitting here because you lack faith. In a small town in Russia that nobody would have ever heard of, if not for the fact that there lived in this town a very holy couple, the Rebbetzin and the Maggid of Mezrich. They were known for their piety, for their celestial vision, for their kindness, and unfortunately, all of this greatness was matched by their abject poverty. And one night, it was time for the Rebbetzin to go to the mikveh. Alas, she did not have the few kopecks necessary. But she resolved that she would go to the mikveh, and she would tell them the truth, and she would raise the money, and she would repay them. But that night, the woman on duty said, no kopecks, no entry. And so with a broken heart, she retraced her steps home on a cold winter night with tears in her eyes. And because of the tears, when she saw the sight of what looked like an exceedingly ornate carriage, she thought it was a mirage. She thought it was a figment of her imagination. But she wiped her tears and she kept walking, and the carriage took on full dimension and came to a stop alongside her. And in this carriage were sitting 4 regal-looking women with very kind faces. And they asked her what she was doing on the road alone. And she shared with them her situation. And they said, how fortuitous. It will be our pleasure to take you as our guests. She took up their kind offer. She immersed that night. She came back home, and her husband looked at her, said, there's something about you. She said, maybe. And she related her experiences, her initial upset, her reversal of fortune. And she concluded her little soliloquy by saying, imagine their kindness. I don't know them. They don't know me. But look what they did for me, for us. And he said to her, you know them. They know you. With your tears, you pulled down from Gan Eden Sarah, Rivkah, Rachel, and Leah. That night, their son Avraham, who was known as Avraham der Malach, Abraham the angel, was conceived. He had in his possession the petek, the receipt that his mother received that night. He would loan it out to people in need of salvation. It's a long story, but I found this story in an old manuscript that was in the possession of my great uncle, who was a direct descendant of Avraham der Malach, who had written the story. I cannot promise each of you such celestial accompaniment that you can discern with your eyes, but I can promise you that we do go with the matriarchs. And we go with a long, long line of women who had to make holes in ice, who looked over their shoulders to the ghetto they were leaving when they went on a train, not knowing if they were going to see their families again. Jewish women, all heroes, have been links in this chain. Today, we need only, literally and figuratively, to walk through the door of the mikveh and gain its blessing. Mikveh, hope. Thank you, my friends.